Hi, it's Jan Howell from YouMakeItSimple.com, here with another fun, easy sewing tutorial. Today I'm going to go over how to make these twisted headbands. I'll be teaching you 3 different easy to make styles. A simple turban, single twisted headband, a double twist headband, and a flat twist headband. These are so cute and quick to make up for adults and babies. You can use any knit fabric and of course an upcycled t-shirt. So let's jump right into it. Simple project. Let's get started. Let's quickly go over the items and materials you'll need to make your twisted headbands. Of course, you'll need your fabric, and some suggestions on that is to get fabric that has some lycra in it or just has a lot of stretch to it. As you know, I like to upcycle and recycle clothing, so all of these items were an existing clothing item. This was a little dress that I'm using for this black piece. This was a shirt, and this was a stretchy cami that I'm using. Love the green. And so you'll need some fabric. You'll be cutting. I'll go over how to measure the pieces in just a minute. If you have a rotary cutter and a rotary knife and mat, those come in really handy for cutting straight edges. If you don't, you can obviously use a pair of scissors. You'll need a turning stick, some kind of turning stick, or the eraser end of a pencil will work. Corresponding colors of thread for your fabric, some straight pins, and a measuring tape, and a sewing machine. Just a regular sewing machine is fine. You can use a serger if you would like. All 3 of these styles of headbands, these twisted headbands, we're going to cut 6 inches. And to get the width, measure the head that you're making these for. And I will have a list of common sizes of heads in case you're making them for an infant or a child and you don't have the child available to measure their head. I'll have that information on my website that you can look up that chart and download and print that. So the formula is just to measure your head and subtract 2 inches from that measurement. So all of these headbands, you're going to measure your head and subtract 2 inches, and that will be how long you will cut the strip. The first headband we're going to go over is a single twisted headband. This size that I'm making is for an adult woman, and my head measurement was 22 inches, so I am subtracting 2, so it's 20 inches by 6 inches. The first thing that you'll do is place the right sides together, fold it in half with right sides together. So you may be wondering, well, how do I tell which is the right side of the fabric? On the stretch of the knit fabric, when you pull it, it will curl to the right side. So as you can see, when I pull that, it curls, and that is the right side. So I'm going to fold that in half, right sides together, and just pin it in a few places so we can sew all the way down and make a tube. And I don't pin the whole thing because I just adjust it as I sew, but you'll kind of want to get that, make sure the fabric is not twisted and laying flat. We'll take this to the sewing machine and sew all the way down. You want to use a stretch stitch, which is on your sewing machine. It's a little lightning bolt stitch, and if you don't have that, most likely you do though. If you don't have that, you can just do a very narrow zigzag stitch all the way down. That way, when the fabric stretches and the headband stretches, the seam is not going to pop. It will go ahead and stretch with it. I have threaded my machine with the similar color and in my bobbin thread, and I am using a jersey knit needle, or you can use a universal needle. That way we're not poking holes in the fabric. Now if you do have a serger, this makes this process a lot easier because that zigzag stitch does take a little bit longer. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can see that that is just a little teeny zigzag stitch that stretches when I pull it. Turn the tube inside out, use your turning stick. I like to come down about a couple inches and just place my turning stick like that and then just start to push it through. So I have opened up the tube with the seam on the top. Flip that over, and to get this cool little twist, we're going to bring the right sides together, but we're going to offset like this, right sides together, with the edge of the top piece in alignment with that back seam. So we're going to wrap that around, keep the edges even, so the seam is on the outside, and then I'm going to fold this one, wrap it around this way, and this is where it gets tricky. If I were to wrap it around the back, it wouldn't work out, but if I wrap it so that I see that seam there? If that's showing, it's correct. So we're going to line up those edges as much as possible, all of those edges, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew about 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and then I'll trim it. Trim the seam, and let's flip the right side out and see what it looks like. So isn't that just cute? You can wear this twist in the front or in the back. There's no seam in the back. Pretty cute little twisted headband. Now let's make the double twisted headband, and for that we have the same measurements, but we're using 2 strips of fabric. Once again, place the right sides together along the long edge and sew all the way down on both pieces. I'm going to use the serger so you can see how much quicker it is, and the serger does have a natural stretch to the stitch. So you can see how much quicker that is. If you have a serger, you might as well use it. Turn the pieces inside out. Find the seam and place it in the center and just flatten it out. Now we're going to place the seam sides facing each other. So this seam's facing up, this one's facing down, and I'm just going to place them in a cross like that. Bring the seam edges together, just set that aside, and then bring the seam edges of this piece together, just getting that center seam together. And now we're going to bring all 4 pieces of fabric, the edges together. line up the edges as much as possible. And I am going to use a single needle machine and not my serger at this point. I'm just bringing the presser foot on the edge of my fabric, and that's going to be my seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. When I get about halfway, I'm going to check the edges and adjust them, maybe pull it out a little bit so they're all even. So down to the very end, and then back stitch. I like to back stitch quite a ways on these just to make sure that that is secure in place. And then I'll go trim off the excess fabric and my threads. Turn it so the wrong side is facing inside and open it up, and voila. So a turban style double twist headband. One more to go. And the last headband we're going to go over is a flat twisted headband. So this is for a child size. You can tell it's a little bit smaller. We're going to take that 6-inch piece, cut to the size, fold it in half, right sides together again, and sew that tube all the way down. Turn it inside out. Now fold it in half so the seam is not in the center this time, it's at the top or the bottom. And then take one end and just fold it over, just twist it like that, and then we're going to fold it in half and bring those edges together. So to know you have it right, folded right, is you'll have one seam on this side and the other seam on the other side. Line up the edges, and you could just sew straight down like we have the others because the seam is going to be on the back side of your head. But if you want a little bit more clean finished edge and to hide the seam, I'm going to show you a little technique that you can do that. It's a little more tedious, but it's still very doable. Before I start sewing, let me show you how this is going to go. So these inner pieces that are touching, I'm going to pin that in place. And then bring it down to that seam allowance there and put a pin. So I'm only pinning through 2 layers of fabric. And I'm going to pull that around as much as I can, because we're going to be sewing around this loop. So that'll be probably enough. And then I'll show you. So we'll just start sewing. We're going to sew and adjust, sew and adjust. You'll get a better idea here in just a second, but we're going to leave a little bit like an inch opening so that we can flip it and put the seam in. I'll show you how it's done. And you want to use just a small seam allowance, like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'll back stitch, of course, and just keep opening that up, lining up the edges. Try not to stretch your fabric. Sew a little, then adjust, kind of twist it again. Sew a little. You could do this by hand too if you wanted to. So I'm just sewing and then bringing those 2 edges together. It's just kind of You don't have a lot of working space. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to remove those pins. Just kind of tuck the other portion inside. See if we can get just a little bit more. And a back stitch and call it good. Just kind of gently pull it and see how I've sewn around and that seam is hidden. See, there's the opening. And bring the folded edges of that seam allowance together. Now, if you're really meticulous, you can hand sew that if you wanted to, or I'm just going to take it to the sewing machine and top stitch right along that edge. Clip the threads. If you want to use a needle and thread to close that opening to make the finished look a little nicer, I've just double threaded a needle and knotted the end, and I'm just going to do a quick whip stitch. Insert my needle from the inside out, and this is just a quick tutorial on how to do that whip stitch. So what you're basically doing is taking little stitches back and forth inside the fold of the edge of the opening there. Going directly from side to side on the inside of that fold. So just another option of another way to close that opening and finish off that back seam. So flip the right side to the outside and make that little twist in the front part of the headband, and you're good to go. There you have 3 twisted headbands. A double twist, a single twist, and a flat twist. So I hope you like that tutorial. I hope that inspires you to get into your knit fabrics. If you have a baby gift to make, these headbands are really cute. Make sure you're watching my other headband tutorials, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you have any questions or concerns, leave a comment in the comment section below. Have fun sewing, and we'll see you next time.